all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or by going to veteransradio.net, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.net. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We also want to thank Eisenhower Center. It's a brain injury recovery center. Learn more about eisenhowercenter.com. They're located in Michigan and in Florida. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. Contact us if you'd like to be a sponsor on Veterans Radio, and let's move on to our program. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today. I'm not sure we've had a four-star on before, but General Larry O. Spencer, retired from the United States Air Force. General, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you so much. I'm ecstatic to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. And so thank you so much.
Well, we're glad to have you on, General, and we're going to try to pull out of you some of your life lessons that you've written into a recent book called Dark Horse, General Larry O. Spencer and his journey from the horseshoe to the Pentagon, and we'll explain the title a little bit as we go along. But as I was telling the General earlier before we started recording, that first part, before he starts putting on the stars, is a really interesting life journey and kind of unusual. So as a young man growing up in Washington, D.C., you were in a kind of a tough inner city neighborhood. Tell us a little bit about those early years, General.
Sure. And thinking back on it, it is sort of interesting to think about. So I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. in Southeast on a street. It was actually 46th Place is the name of the street officially. But unofficially it was called the Horseshoe because it's actually shaped like a horseshoe. And again, in an inner city environment, growing up in the 60s essentially, experiencing the civil rights movement, got the opportunity to attend the Martin Luther King March on Washington. All of the anti-Vietnam protests, watching that on TV every night with body counts and all of the opposition in the country at the time to Vietnam. My father was an Army soldier. Spent 20 years in the Army, Purple Heart from the Korean War. My mother hadn't graduated high school, and maybe we can probably get into that a little later. But really poor school system. I was not a very good student, and as a result of that, found my way into situations I probably should not have been involved with. But the neighborhood itself, I think for the times was fairly typical. But unfortunately, because I was in an inner city and not really exposed to the potential and possibilities that I could have as an adult, my self-esteem and self-worth was not very high. And frankly, as a young kid and growing into a teenager, I really didn't have much of much of a plan or much hope for my future. To be honest with you, back then, particularly growing up in I was going to say predominantly African American neighborhood, but it was 100% African American. At the time, the expectation was that I would be good at sports, and I was. Unfortunately, that same expectation was not there for academic success. So I was not a very good student. But putting all that together, it was an interesting childhood. I learned a lot from my environment, and in hindsight, it made me who I am today. But certainly not. When folks, you kind of teed it up well. When folks ask me, how did you become a 4-star general? Well, first of all, I think that's the wrong question. I don't think there is a formula. But when they found out about, my story, my life, particularly my beginning, they kind of, get the picture that it's not really where you start or how you start or what conditions you're born into. It's what you do with those conditions and and how you prepare yourself for opportunities that are out there that really count.
Well, I'm going to back you up a little bit and probe a little harder because I think it really is instructive for folks to know your parents grew up in the rural South under Jim Crow.
Correct.
Your dad lost his left hand in the Korean War and wore a prosthetic that today, nobody would. The difference between prosthetics today and back then is so dramatic. I think I hate to use this phrase, but it was Captain Hook back then.
Right.
That couldn't have been easy for a young boy to deal with, not only, looking at him yourself, but like how the neighborhood and how others viewed your father's injuries. So, those are rough things as a young man to deal with, I would think.
Yes. And in my case, keep in mind that folks back then that served in the military, the Korean War, World War II, to some extent Vietnam, but that generation of folks did not talk about, and still don't talk about their war experience. There was no acronym called PTSD, so they were told to, when they had the trauma of war and the injuries of war, they were told to suck it up. And so, if you can imagine, I grew up as a kid in a neighborhood. You're right. My father wore a hook. I mean, Captain Hook is probably a good description. The Captain Hook from the Peter Pan play, and he never told us. I was the oldest of 6 kids. He never told us what happened. We sort of knew that he lost his left hand in the Korean War, but the circumstances he never talked about, and that was really tough for me because, kids can be cruel, as you know, and I got teased a lot, about my father, and being Captain Hook, all the Captain Hook jokes, and that was really tough for me. One, because it sounded so cruel and unfair, but 2, I could not go back to them and explain what happened, and so that was looking back on it, it was really tough on my brothers and sisters and I. Just to take it a step further, I didn't find out about my father's injury until I was a colonel in the Air Force, if you can imagine, and happened to be in his home. He was going to attend my pinning on ceremony, and he handed me a book. And the book was Firefight at Yichon. It was a book written by his then company commander about the Korean War. And I took the book home. I didn't think much about it because he didn't tell me anything about the book. He just handed it to me. A couple of weeks later, because I had it sitting on my nightstand, I opened it and started reading it, and I was just fascinated about the graphic nature of the book and the Korean War. And to put this in context, the military wasn't integrated until just before the Korean War, and so even though technically President Truman integrated the military, it wasn't really integrated, on practical terms. So
right.
My dad was in the Army during this period, And so he was in an unofficial segregated unit. And so his company commander was also black. So to make a long story short, he was considered one of the sharper soldiers in the unit. He and another gentleman, Sergeant Monroe, were tasked to move a bulldozer from the town they were in to the South Korean town of Yichon. And because the flatbed truck that they would typically transport the bulldozer on was inoperable, my dad and this Sergeant Monroe were tasked to, what the term they used was walk, because it moved so slow, but to essentially drive this bulldozer the total of about 100 miles. And so as you can imagine, that was a night and day 24-hour task because the rest of the company moved on. So during that trip, my dad fell off the bulldozer while it was still moving, fell onto the tracks, and instinctively turned his body off the tracks to get on the ground. Unfortunately, his left hand got caught in the gears of the bulldozer and got mauled. And think about the timing here, because today we have combat search and rescue that can transport a wounded person from the battlefield to a hospital in a matter of hours. That was not the case back then. And so he literally laid out on the ground in South Korea, cold, no one around to help other than the soldier that was with him on the bulldozer. He fell into a coma. He developed gangrene in his hand, was in really bad shape. And so when they finally reached him, they transported him to Japan, and he had his left hand removed. And as you pointed out, considered pretty primitive surgery today, but he literally had his hand amputated, and in the prosthetic, it was a simple hook, rather than now they've got computers and hands that look real and can pretty much do anything a hand can do. Of course, they just didn't have that surgical procedure back then. And so he had his hand amputated. He was sent then back to Walter Reed for recovery. And of course, they wanted to discharge him, but he didn't want to go back to the farm in Southern Virginia. So he requested to stay in the Army, and they said he could if he could still pass his marksmanship test, which he did. And he stayed in the Army for 20 years and served most of that 20 years at the same place over at the Walter Reed Annex. It was called Forest Glen. It was a laboratory that worked on prosthetics. So even though I'm technically an Army brat, I'm really not, because we never moved. I spent my entire Army brat time as a kid in one house in D.C., and we never moved. So it was quite traumatic for me. So it was interesting. And
again, this is one of those lessons we're trying to pass along, folks. He never spoke to you about it. You read about this story in a book, and you and your brothers and sisters, this was like, not part of what was explained. It's so important to tell our family kind of what we've been through, and in some regards it helps explain some of the post-traumatic stress problems that a family has. But your dad's story is a whole nother interview process. But I want to get you reference this, and I think this is important too to get across. You reference the farm.
Yes.
And as I read your story, and again, I'm more fascinated in the story before you start pinning on stars, but we'll get there. Talk a little bit about how the time on the grandparents' farm was really formative for you.
It was 100% formative for me, because growing up in Southeast D.C., I didn't consider it fortunate at the time, because my grandfather, who lived in southwestern Virginia, not far from Appomattox, had a tobacco farm. So as you can imagine, a kid growing up in Southeast D.C., the thought of being on a farm working tobacco fields, in the middle of summer was not exactly, something I wanted to do. But in hindsight, it ended up being very formative for me and very instructive, and taught me lessons that I lean on today. Again, it was in the South. They were out there in the middle of nowhere. My grandfather was a deacon in the church, and so he and I and my cousin who was there essentially worked tobacco every day, other than Sunday when we went to church for most of the day. But a particular story that was really instructive for me was one summer I was on his farm, and again, those of you who haven't experienced a farm, I want to paint this picture for you because we're literally there on 65 acres, really on our own. No one else is around. We very seldom leave the farm. Everything that we subsist with pretty much is on the farm. So we didn't go for visits. We didn't, go to the movies. We didn't go to the store. We didn't really go anywhere other than church on Sunday. And so and our typical routine was to get up every morning. I had chores. I would feed the hogs. I would, do certain things. And then we would head out to one of the many tobacco fields. And this one particular summer, my cousin, who generally would be there with me, was with his mother in Philadelphia. So he would join us about 2 weeks later. So it was just my grandfather and I. He was pretty much an introvert. I was as well. So we didn't talk a lot, but he decided, this particular summer that he would mentor me, I guess, for lack of a better term. And he taught me these nuggets of wisdom that, at least nuggets of wisdom in his mind, not necessarily in my mind. As an example, he taught me the difference between a mule and a donkey. Why I needed to know that is beyond me, but he thought I did. He also told me that even a blind rooster finds a kernel of corn every once in a while, and frankly, I'm still scratching my head over that one as well. But so this one particular day, we jump on the tractor, which was our routine. Our typical routine was we would jump on the tractor and head out to a field. This particular day, we didn't do that. He went and got the horse. He had one horse and one cow, and he got the horse, hooked up a platform to it, put a plow on the platform. We went out to one of the fields, and he hooked the plow up to this horse and started plowing these perfect rows up and down because they were going to plant vegetables later. And as a, 11, 12-year-old kid, I was fascinated about this. I've never seen anybody operate a plow before. And so I was sitting on the ground kind of playing in the dirt. Keep in mind, my grandfather and I have probably talked now more than we had since I was born. And so he took a potty break, went off into the woods, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I can impress my grandfather if I get behind this horse and continue his work so that when he comes back, he won't have as much to do. So I strapped myself in behind this horse, had never done this before. Again, those of you who haven't seen a plow, it's a big, heavy piece of equipment. I barely got it upright. And I knew the command to make the horse go forward. And so I gave the command, the horse starts to walk. And so I'm kind of trotting behind the horse. The problem is I didn't know how to operate the plow. That's problem number one. Problem number two, I didn't know the command to make the horse stop. Didn't think about that till after I got into it. So now the horse is going directly across my grandfather's perfectly plowed roads. And I'm scared, don't know what to do, don't know how to make the horse stop. And let me pause just for a second, because I want to be clear. I don't advocate this. And I'm not saying that folks should do this. Times have changed. But back then, in the 60s, on a farm by yourself with no one else around, you could whip your kids. And in fact, not only could you whip your kids, but if the neighbors found out about it, they would encourage it. So I'm saying he had never done that to me before, but that's going through my mind as I'm messing up his morning's work. And so the horse is moving. I'm trotting to keep up. My grandfather emerges from the woods and is in shock. He yells at me and he says, "Larry, what are you doing?" And I turn around. If you can picture this in your mind, I'm sort of half turned looking back at him, but trying to continue to move sideways because the horse didn't stop. And as I stumbled and almost fell, instinctively, I yelled out, "Whoa," just trying to steady myself. And of course, the horse stopped because that was
the command.
Yeah. Exactly. I didn't know that. And so I was glad the horse stopped. But as I turned around, now my grandfather's storming toward me, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, here we go. By the way, the tool of choice on the farm to discipline your kids was called a switch, which essentially is a tree branch. And we're out there in the middle of nowhere with hundreds of tree branches in arm's reach. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get it now. And so he storms up to me, and the first thing he says was, "Are you okay?" Which I wasn't expecting. And I said, yes. And I was about to apologize and say, hey, I'm sorry. I was just trying to help. And he stopped me, and he said something to me that was maybe considered inarticulate, but was very impactful. He said to me, it's okay to try and fail, but it's not okay not to try.
Wow.
And what he meant by that was, hey, I'm your grandfather. I'm proud that you tried. And by the way, in your life, there's going to be a lot of opportunities out there. You can't be afraid to try, and you can't be afraid when you fail because, by the way, you are going to fail. But what I learned from that lesson was, no matter how hard it seems, and how scared you are, go out there and try anyway. And that lesson has led me my entire life. It still leads me today.
No, I think these are the sorts of things that people, again, kind of forget. It's common wisdom. Once you say it out loud, you go, yeah, that makes sense. But sometimes in the moment you don't live it. But I want to back up because I want to draw some dots. We didn't get a chance we won't have a chance to talk much about your mom. But, between your dad, your mom, your grandpa, there were folks along the way that made the sorts of impressions, foundation building, morals, virtues that really got you along, even though in your own words you had low self-esteem, you struggled in school, and you were way heavier than you should have been. Because of that low self-esteem, but it seems like in general in your life story, there's always been somebody there helping, promoting, suggesting different approaches, and maybe you want to comment about having that kind of support or mentors, if you will.
100%. In fact, when I talk to groups today, one of the things I tell them, if they don't have multiple mentors, they need to leave this room and go start developing them, because mentors and folks who took an interest in me were so valuable to my both professional and personal life. We could have an entire show just talking about individual mentors that impacted my life, but I'll just give you an example. As you know, I enlisted initially, and by the way, the fact that I spent about 7.5 years enlisted was so valuable to my professional development that I can't even articulate how valuable that was to me and how much I appreciated my enlisted time. But one of my initial enlisted assignments was in Taiwan. And again, keep in mind, this was in the early 70s, where long hair was in vogue. And if you could see me now, and I could, and I am. Let's just say I am hair challenged today. So I would have to ask you to use your imagination. But back in those days, I had an afro like you wouldn't believe. Now, was that authorized? Technically no, but all my friends had long hair, and we disguised it as best we could, and we pushed the envelope on the hair length, let's put it that way, significantly. And so I went to Taiwan, and I made a bet with my friends that, and several of us did, that we could go the whole remote tour, the whole year, without a haircut. And all of us did. We went the entire year, and we didn't get a haircut. And so I then came back from Taiwan in the Air Force to a command called Strategic Air Command, which no longer exists, but it was considered back then the toughest command in the Air Force. They had the strategic B-52s and ICBMs, and it was just a very strict command, very strict dress and appearance standards. And so, now I show up on this base though with all this hair. And so again, I would disguise it as best I could to stay within regulation during the day. My wife actually braided my hair during the weekend. Again, to jump to near the end here was one morning, Monday morning, I was not able to, term we used was pack my hair down. And so I was sitting in an office with my hair, over all out everywhere. And in hindsight, it was embarrassing. And I was 19 years old. I should have even known better at 19, but I didn't. So, but fortunately for me, I was in early. A Chief Master Sergeant, who in the Air Force is the top enlisted grade, walked by the office, sort of looked in and saw me, but didn't say anything. And I kind of wiped my forehead as though, man, I escaped a bullet there. And a few seconds later, he literally did the Michael Jackson moonwalk and came back and looked in the door and said, I can't believe what I'm seeing. He said, Airman, get up from your chair and follow me. So I got up. I followed him outside. By the way, maybe you know the answer to this. I don't know. Every senior NCO I have ever run into, they all had pickup trucks. I don't know why that is, but they all had pickup trucks. So he put me in his pickup truck. He took me to the barbershop. We walked in. He paid the barber. He sat down in his chair. He said, give him a military haircut. And so I sit there watching all my hair fall on the floor as he had a big smile on his face. And so the interesting thing, though, is this Chief Master Sergeant, he had seen me around, and he said, you do good work. You seem like a pretty sharp guy, but he said, you need to understand, if you're in the Air Force, you're going to have to follow the standards. And he said, look, I get it. I used to be young. I understand a lot of your friends are doing this, but look, if you want to get out of the Air Force and grow your hair long, then do it. But while you're in the Air Force, you need to follow the standards. And so we were back in his pickup truck, and we were on the way back. Really nice guy. And he decided to stop by the base park. And we just had a long talk about, he asked me, what are your plans? What do you want to do? Are you in college? Why are you wasting your time? I mean, you're in the Air Force, and whether you decide to stay in and make it a career or not, you should be improving yourself, and you've got a family, and you need to take this serious. He said, are you taking college courses? I said, no. And he said, why not? And I didn't have a good answer. So he took me to the base education office. I signed up for college courses on the spot. He took me back to work, never said a word to my boss, and became a mentor of mine ever since. So he got me on my way to completing my college degree and getting a commission in the Air Force. And obviously we don't have the time, but I've got mentors like that that we could talk for a week about, because throughout my life and my career, folks have stepped in at strategic times and said, why are you doing this? Or why don't you do that? And they were very, very helpful for me. Again, they looked at me and they said, this is not a bad person, but he's young and immature. I'm going to take this person under my wing. And I can't tell you how valuable that was to me. And by the way, I make it a point now as a result of that to mentor as many young folks as I can today, because I know firsthand how important it is to have folks who will tell you what you need to know versus what you necessarily, think you want to hear.
And I think that's really the lesson there is you have to be receptive to it. Somebody
Correct.
has to be willing to give it the straight story to you. And in a way that this Chief Master Sergeant did, he paid for the haircut. He didn't humiliate you. He took an interest in you. He had a long talk with you, and then followed through by saying, we're going right now, and you're going to sign up for college courses. And then didn't go back and ratch out, if you will, to your boss. I mean, right. There's a way to be a great mentor, and the book has some phenomenal stories of people who've touched your life like that. And we're talking to General Larry Spencer. His book is Dark Horse, his journey from the horseshoe to the Pentagon. General Spencer is at the time was one of only 9 African Americans promoted to 4 stars. He ultimately became the Air Force's 37th Vice Chief of Staff. And as I said, the those early years are what I think have a lot of really good lessons for us. But I also want to ask you to talk a little bit, because I think this becomes again one of those pivotal points. You get your college in, you get commissioned, you go to officer training school, but along the line you changed your MOS from administration to financial management, and I think a lot of people don't. They don't know of all the career opportunities in the military, and they may have an understanding of administration, but no understanding of what financial management is in an organization like this. And it really is where you made your bones. Can you tell us a little bit about that career change and its impact?
Sure. Yeah, I was, I entered the Air Force in administration. It's called communications now. It's a little bit fancier title, but it was essentially administrative. So, typing, postal. In fact, I worked in the post office when I was in Taiwan. Before a compute, I'm telling my age now, but when I joined the Air Force, there were no computers. And on my desk was a Royale typewriter. And many of your listeners probably never seen a typewriter. There was a large administrative MOS, if you will, to manage all the administrative filing and all that sort of thing. But at some point, to be honest with you, that wasn't very exciting. And as I started to take college courses, started to branch out, my self-esteem started to improve. I really got fascinated with study. I learned how to study. I realized for the first time that, my poor grades in school weren't as a result of my intelligence or lack thereof. It was just a result of, one, confidence, and two, not knowing how to study and how to do homework and how to figure out problems. So once I did that, I loved school, and it got me to branch out. And a friend of mine, who was in the comptroller or financial management unit on the base, invited me over to kind of look around. And I said, man, this looks great. And the comptroller or the financial management career field consists of several opportunities. One is the traditional accounting and finance, where you pay people and you process vouchers. But there was also budget, which you actually developed a budget for the base and executed that. And then there was something back then called cost analysis, where you actually did time motion studies and you really focused on how to best save money and to make the base more efficient. So I sort of fell in love with that. And I by the way, anyone who reads the book, this will come through loud and clear. I like to call myself very frugal and very cost efficient. If you ask my wife, she'll just tell you that I'm really cheap, which is probably true as well. But that combination of, my love for and passion for efficiency and saving money, it was just a natural marriage for me. And so I was really happy to be commissioned in that career field. And as you said, kind of where I made my bones and my reputation.
Yeah, and it really allowed this incredible path up to 4-star general with all kinds of opportunities along the way that nobody would ever thought this low self-esteem, overweight black kid from inner city Washington would ever have had the opportunity for. And I think that's why your story is so inspirational, is it gives us all hope we can move beyond maybe the place we see ourselves in.
No, I agree 100%. And, we, without getting into politics here, I think regardless of your political leanings, I think most people would agree that our country is really divided right now. And I think in the time that we're in right now, I think we need more sort of inspirational, examples to make us all step back and say, look, regardless of the differences we have, we're still in the greatest country on earth, and we can't let that get away from us. And that if in this country, if you want to succeed, you can. Now, does it mean hard work? Absolutely. For most of us, many of us, or most of us are not born into a lot of wealth. Most of us have to do it the old-fashioned way. But in this country, can you do it? Absolutely. And sometimes I worry that we're so busy fighting each other that we forget to step back and say, you know what? The reason we are able to fight each other is because we are in the greatest country on the planet, and that allows us the freedoms to say and speak our minds and to disagree as we see please. So I hope my book will also sort of get people to sort of step back and say, yes, my situation may not be the best, but that's okay. I can achieve my goals in spite of that.
Well, and the arc, Larry, is even more dramatic when you think back. Okay, the Spencers have moved from the tobacco farm to the Pentagon, right, in 2 generations. I mean, correct. Only in this country could you have pulled that off. Now, yeah, it wasn't easy. There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of impediments. But it can be done, and you did it. So again, I really recommend the book Dark Horse, General Larry O. Spencer, United States Air Force, retired, to folks. This was put out by the United States Naval Institute Press. You can find it at www.usni.org. It's also available in an ebook fashion. And General, I suspect I can buy this on all of my regular e-commerce outlets as well.
That is correct. It's out there. Yeah, whatever your favorite outlet is for purchasing books, it's out there.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by going to veteransradio.net. And until next time, you are dismissed.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, NVBDC.org, Eisenhower Center, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Presscorn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor. They keep us on the air, as does your support. Go to Facebook, go to veteransradio.net, and support our efforts. And until next time, you are dismissed.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah. Sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.